there was my life before it and then my life after it. It allowed me to scratch the surfaces of the big areas that in my life where I was not free. And much of that revolved around my ability to feel, or to allow myself to feel all of this emotion and pain that I was like compartmentalizing. And it just allowed me to face it.
Welcome to the Multiverse, where we believe that mushrooms can actually change the world, and that if humans mirrored the magic and wisdom of the fungi kingdom, we would have a far more joyous and connected planet. Each week, we'll be meeting with thought leaders and experts to extract the best insights and stories across everything from functional fungi, psychedelic medicine, and so much more. Thanks for listening. Step into the Multiverse with us. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Into the Multiverse. I'm your host, Ali Shaper, and I'm really excited because we have my friend, Nimai Delgado. We were just talking about all the crazy, different, incorrect ways to say your name. We heard some really good ones, incling Nemo, Naomi. That is not how you say your name. It's Nimai Delgado.
Yes, thank you for saying it right.
You're welcome. And if you are in the vegan fitness wellness space, people are probably already familiar with you. We actually, for context, just recorded with Bianca a few hours ago. She was just sitting on my couch a little less than 2 hours ago, and I learned so much about your relationship and got some little tidbits on you as a person, but I'm really excited to dive deep into all the things. So first of all, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to chat. You and I haven't really gotten, we like orbit around the same friend group, but we haven't had a chance to drop in. So this will be the first time. So I'm super excited for that.
Same. I said the same thing to Bianca. I was like, you know, we share a lot of mutual friends that I've heard wonderful things about both of you from, but it's always in passing. It's always like a quick, like, I'm on the way out or I'm out of town. And so we've been orbiting for quite some time. And so it's going to be cool. I've now, you know, orbited you, heard a lot of things about you from mutual friends who know you really well, and done a deep stalk of you on the internet, which is where I want to start.
Fun.
I want to share a few things for some context painting.
All right.
I also listened to the first part of your episode with our mutual friend, Aaron Alexander, when you guys were talking about intros. And you know, you were talking about it's really nice to give some personal anecdotes to the person when you're giving an intro to them on the podcast. It just makes it feel more personal if you have the relationship. I was like, well, we don't know each other that well, so I had to go to the internet and find some things. You know, if you do a quick search of you online, you will find out that you're one of the most, you know, prominent wellness, vegan, fitness influencers, honestly, that is out there. And as well as Bianca as well. You guys have built massive platforms, you know, but outside of the fact that you've never eaten meat, you're an entrepreneur, founder. You've recently also started a podcast, the Nimai Delgado podcast, where you're kind of pivoting a little bit and going more into spirituality and mindfulness and kind of things that are outside of just fitness and wellness. But there's a Twitter quote or Twitter post that you shared recently that I thought was a really interesting kind of context painting to give a picture of who you are. My life changed when I realized that I am the creator of my reality, and I took responsibility in co-creating all that I've ever experienced and will experience. I have the agency to choose how I respond to that, which I cannot control. The world changes if you see it through a new set of eyes. I wanted to share that, and I also wanted to share the 3 things that come up when you Google you on the internet. What protein does Nimai Delgado use? Is Nimai Delgado still vegan? When did Nimai Delgado go vegan? So there's all these pressing questions around, you know, specifically your veganism, but I kind of want to go into, you know, deeper into all the things that make you who you are as a person. So I guess let's start there. I'd love to hear your story. The last thing I'll say in this long-winded intro is I love to look up people's LinkedIn because it's like you don't understand how people close the gap. The first thing on your LinkedIn is a reliability engineer in Baton Rouge, a corrosion engineer, and then there's like this stark jump with no context to CEO of, you know, vegan fitness. Close the gap.
Yeah, I forgot about LinkedIn. I haven't updated my LinkedIn in forever. It literally hit me the other day. I was like, oh, I should probably update that.
I love LinkedIn.
No
one uses it. It's like so embarrassing, but
I think we should use it. I love it. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it could be beneficial in some way because it's this whole other social platform where it's like more business oriented. And I feel like being the CEO of 2 companies, I should be on there. So
I think your content would do really well on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And it's also just fascinating from like a learning about, for people that do update their LinkedIn, you know, you just like, you get these timestamps of their life. Whereas Instagram, you kind of get like moments and memories.
That's so true.
I mean, like, how did this happen?
Yeah, that's a big jump. That's a big jump. So
what is a corrosion engineer?
It's basically my role. Whenever I graduated college, I graduated with my mechanical engineering degree. I can get into why I chose mechanical engineering, but I accepted a job offer in California, and it was because I took this class my last year in college about corrosion engineering. And in Baton Rouge, there's a lot of industry, so a lot of oil and gas, a lot of refineries, just a lot of plants, chemical plants, and they have a lot of issues with corrosion. So I just took this class because I thought it was fascinating, and it was really an easy elective, to be honest. And on my resume, I put that. So this oil and gas company saw that, and they hired me to be a corrosion engineer, which I didn't know much about. And I accepted this position in California. I wanted to get out of the South just because I'd lived there my whole life, and I wanted a new, fresh start on the West Coast because I felt like it was always my home, even though I'd never been. I felt like it was a lot more progressive. It was a lot more open-minded, and it was just a lot more my vibe. And this oil and gas company hired me. It was a great position, 6 figures, starting off at 22, which for me, that was like a dream come true. And then the first day on the job, I realized that this was not for me. This was like, I was like, what did I sign up to and what did I get myself into? Basically, I made sure that things didn't blow up. That was my role. Making sure that the pipelines, the vessels, the tanks, the relief valves all had mechanical integrity, meaning that they could withstand the pressure and environments that they were under, and identifying where things could possibly corrode and address those preemptively. So that meant doing non-destructive testing. That included ultrasonics. It included magnetic wave frequencies, all of these really interesting technologies that I was in charge of, basically going to our operations and saying, hey, this piece of equipment probably won't last another 6 months. We should make some changes here, either material change or plan to replace it to last another 20 years. Because if not, either there could be a rupture, there could be a leak, or potential explosion, which could then harm people or the environment. So it was a lot of responsibility. And I did that for 5 years before saying that enough is enough. I'm out of this, and started a whole new career in health and fitness.
Wow. If only we gave the same attention to, it's kind of a cool parallel. If only we gave the same attention that we do to, preventative with all these pipes that you're doing to our own bodies, which I guess is kind of the transition that you made.
It is. Yeah. And
did you
I guess
take any of those lessons?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, engineering is just approaching a system with this process of understanding how you can optimize it, how you can make things more efficient. So your body is no different. It's a series of systems. And once you understand those systems, you can learn how to feed it the right fuel. You can learn how to create an environment where it thrives rather than corroding or deteriorating. So that was kind of the parallel, the approach that I took, because once I started figuring out how to work out, how to train, the next thing was fuel. How do I fuel myself for not only my short-term, but long-term goals so that I don't have to make these repairs in the future? And that was kind of the mentality that I started approaching fitness and my nutrition. And then I really credit that was the reason why I was able to have such success in such a short period of time. I did my first bodybuilding show in 2015 as a vegan, and then turned pro in 2016, which for anybody that's in the competitive sport of bodybuilding, it's a very short timeline to go professional. Most people take years. Sometimes they try and never do. So it was a blessing for me to have that approach, because I feel like it just gave me this little bit of a advantage of like shortening that timeline.
And so where did the health and wellness journey come in though? Was this just something you're always passionate about? From what I've found about you online, you've always been, is it true you've never eaten meat ever in your life?
Yeah. So I was born into it. That's what I always tell people. I was born into this plant-based lifestyle. Both of my parents were vegetarian for spiritual reasons. Part of their philosophy was following a life or living a life that caused as little suffering as possible to other beings and also yourself. So that includes not acts of not contributing or participating in acts of violence. That includes your thoughts, your actions, and your deeds. So whenever we speak negatively about ourselves, that could be considered an act of violence towards ourselves. And the same thing goes towards other people, using your words or your actions towards other people or other living beings, including animals. So in order to reduce our contribution to that is the main reason why they didn't eat animals, because if an animal does die before its time, before its natural life ends, there was an act of violence there. So just by choosing to refrain from contributing or participating in that cycle, you are not going to have that energy reflected back to you in the sense of karma. So my parents helped me understand that in a very simple way when I was really young. So that's the reason why I never ventured out or rebelled and wanted to try meat, even though all of my peers, I grew up in Mississippi, so what they did, I mean, for sport was hunting, fishing, and barbecuing. So I never really participated in that. So I always felt like an outcast and had to defend my beliefs. And it's even challenging now as an adult to try to explain that to somebody. But for a kid, I just kind of removed myself from the conversation and just stopped talking about it with my friends, because I would just say, I don't like meat, or no, I'm okay, because I didn't want it to be a topic of conversation where I was defending my beliefs. So it wasn't until I was like 25, after I'd already moved away and started really coming into like owning who I was as a person, is also the same time I went vegan, just because I saw a video about what happens behind the curtains of dairy industry. And after I saw that, I was just like, I don't really want to contribute or participate with that anymore, completely not knowing about the health side effects I was going to have. And it ended up being the best decision that I ever made. It completely changed the trajectory of my life, just that one decision.
Wow. And so, it sounds like all the decisions, and because I was vegan for a pretty good chunk of time, like 4 or 5 years. But my decision around it was predominantly health, because I was learning about the health factors. And then I started to learn about environmental spirituality. So it kind of went in the reverse mode for me. And I think a lot of people maybe will come to it originally because it's, they're looking at their own health journey and figuring out like how they can optimize themselves. And then they start to learn all of these things that you grew up with. So once you started to learn, the actual health benefits around being vegan, because it sounds like that was a complete byproduct.
It was.
Then after learning that, did you solidify in your belief system? You're like, whoa, this is the most optimal way to live regardless of environmental impact. Like, I guess the question is, if, environmental spirituality, all those things were not a factor, would you still choose veganism because you think it's the most optimal health choice personally?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. And I don't want to, I don't like speaking in absolutes. So I don't like saying that everyone could be vegan. I think that there are circumstances that prevent people or make it extremely inconvenient for them to adopt a fully plant-based lifestyle.
Yeah.
For me, I can make those choices and have that privilege to make those decisions. And that's why I don't like saying like everybody should be vegan. It's the healthiest thing for them. Everybody's different. Everybody has a unique fingerprint of a digestive system. They have their own heritage or their own genetics that play a factor in that too. I know for a fact this is what is the healthiest decision for me based off of how I've felt before and how I've felt since. So the moment I cut out dairy, for example, my digestive system completely healed itself. I thought that, having digestive discomfort, going to the bathroom irregularly, having gas, all of that was just a part of me trying to build muscle and like eating higher protein foods that were predominantly coming from dairy products at the time because I was vegetarian. So things like whey protein, cottage cheese, Greek yogurt. I was eating, higher amounts of those because that's where I was getting my protein sourced from. And it was just wrecking my stomach. And I was like, well, I guess that's just how things are. The moment I cut that out and started to replace those protein sources with plant-based protein sources, I was getting more fiber in my diet. I was getting more micronutrients in my diet. I was getting more polyphenols. I was getting more antioxidants, and my digestive system completely healed itself. And I started to have more energy and feel incredible, which then led to more results, more strength in the gym and shorter recovery times to where I could train sooner or retrain again quicker than if I were to be sore for longer and not be ready to train again. So it just kind of worked itself out. And then afterwards, even like spiritually, I started to feel lighter. I started to feel more energized. And it was just a different, it's hard to quantify because, how do you quantify how you feel spiritually? But I just felt better overall. So I feel like that showed up in my relationships. It showed up in my discovery of like, why am I here? Like, how do I want to use my energy? Do I want to use it to, spend all my precious time and energy working for a company that wasn't aligned? I did feel like I was doing important work, but it wasn't fulfilling my soul. Like there was a huge void there. And whenever I found training and found, how good I felt when I was in the gym, and then people were coming to me asking me questions, how do you do it? I want to learn, or that maybe they didn't think it was possible. And through me, they found this alternative lifestyle that also allowed them to feel great. I was just like, this is where I need to be spending my time and energy, because it really does fill me up. And I don't necessarily care how much money I'm making, because I've been making money, and that doesn't provide me with happiness. It provides me with financial security, but it doesn't really feed my soul. And lo and behold, once I left that engineering job and let go of that idea of the financial security or working in a career that was more traditional, because that's what I had been taught, I really proved to myself that, yeah, there's this whole other way of living where you can, have a successful career and help people and feel good about what you're doing and fulfilled, and do something that you're really passionate about at the same time. So it was a beautiful lesson. I don't regret engineering or doing that whatsoever, because it really showed me where I needed to be.
Yeah, and I think, to bring it back to LinkedIn, bring it back to LinkedIn, you're probably wondering where I'm going with this, is, like a lot of people, they just see the highlights, right? Like they just see you now in the version of yourself that has, somewhere north of like 600,000 followers on Instagram. You've built this massive audience. You have 2 companies. You've built all this stuff, but people don't see the journey. Like there's so much in between there. Mm-hmm. And I think why people have a lot of resistance, or they can't really fully wrap their brain around like leaving their corporate job or leaving anything. Maybe it's not corporate. Maybe they're, maybe it's just something they're unhappy doing, is because they don't know that it's possible that you can be anything or do anything. Mm-hmm. And Travis Brewer, right? Mm-hmm. Travis Brewer Ninja. Yeah. He was on the show talking about how the most impactful person that he met, or one of the most impactful people he met when he was like pre-ninja, like mm-hmm. in maybe like ninja starter era, mm-hmm. was someone that he met at a retreat that told them they built human-sized bird's nests for a living. And for whatever reason, what that triggered in him is this understanding and awakening to the fact that you can be and do anything. Mm-hmm. Like there is no limit. And is there a person, in your life, or a moment, you kind of highlighted a few points here, but is there anything else that was super impactful for you along your journey to just like land you where you are here? It can be a person or an experience.
Yeah, for sure. The one that comes to mind is whenever I had first kind of broke out into the scene of like the fitness influencer wellness space, I started getting requests to go give speeches at these conferences where people were just really curious about my story. I fully am aware that I have lived a very non-traditional life, being raised in a Hindu commune in Mississippi by, Argentinian immigrants, and then end up being this vegan bodybuilder. So people are really fascinated by my story, and I share it because I also feel the same way. I feel like I also thought that I had to be this person, or thought that there was this one path that I had to follow, or this one template of how to find your career path. And whenever I started doing those speeches, I was getting exposure to all of these different people in all of these different industries. And I remember one speech I gave in London where this guy came up to me, and he was just so excited to meet me. And also he was in tears with gratitude, because through the information that I shared on social media, completely unknowing who it was reaching or who's reading it, apparently he had learned from me about the healing power of a plant-based diet. And he showed his mom, who was suffering from diabetes, and she was bedridden and was not able to walk. And within a few months, she was able to reclaim her health. And he credited the information that he learned from me for saving his mom's life. And I just thought to myself, I was like, well, you're giving me way too much credit here, first of all. Mm-hmm. But second of all, like, wow, like I had no idea that information was reaching people in that way. And I felt almost a duty at that point to help people, or to continue on this path, because even if I might not see the ripple effects that it's having, people are listening and people's lives are changing for the better. So I just felt like, how many other people are out there that are listening to what I have to say and maybe not commenting, maybe not liking, maybe not sending messages letting me know, but are still really benefiting from that. So that really created a drive in me to continue, on the path that I was on, which allowed me the confidence that I was doing the right thing. And that if I followed this, even though I didn't know how it was going to turn out, that I was going to be okay. Because I fully believe that if you have that intention of being of service to the world, the universe will support you back.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm thinking back to, if you look at most of the people in your life are probably in a similar way, like the best information I've gotten about my health, or honestly most things in my life, have come from like that peer-to-peer type relationship with amazing people on the internet, like predominantly Instagram. And it's amazing what you can learn from people sharing their own story. And specifically if you are passionate about functional medicine or alternative healing methods, like you're not typically seeing a lot of people that are finding their answers through Western medicine. If it's like, unique problems, whether it's psychosomatic or whatever it ends up being. And so everything that you're sharing, and we had a beautiful conversation with Bianca around the same stuff. Like it's so important, because the few people that those are only the people that are sharing it, right? Like the amount of people that this information is reaching is probably so far spread than you could even imagine. And then those people are then empowered to share that information. So it's just like, that's the beautiful thing about social media, right? What the kind of like downside is, which I kind of want to lead to this next question around, because so many people approach you about, being vegan, and that's probably the most prominent question you get is like, where do you get your protein? Like it's stuff around that realm. Like, where would you point people for like the most accurate information around this topic? Like, there's documentaries like What the Health, there's Forks Over Knives, like there's so much out there because you're living and breathing this every single day. If you had to say, like top 3 resources where you're like, these people nailed it, or there's parts of it that they really got right, for like best information about that you think aligns with your perspective on health.
The first one that comes to mind is nutritionfacts.org. That's put together by, it's led by a doctor named Dr. Michael Greger, and he reviews almost every piece of literature on nutrition. And he puts together these really comprehensive short videos that are easy to digest. And he has a topic video on pretty much everything that you would ever have a question on. So that's a really great resource. And he lists every single study as well. So that's where I got a lot of my information too whenever I was doing my research, because, my background was not nutrition or nutrition sciences. It was more so like, it was corrosion. It was corrosion, yeah, and engineering and thermodynamics and fluid mechanics and machine design and systems and all of these other things that, led me to where I am by offering me the technical skill set and the processes of how to approach a problem and have a creative solution to it. So that's where I started. And then I just did my own research and found what worked for me through my own practical research of trial and error. And then always taking data, because I'm just a nerd. So I like measuring and giving trends and seeing how things work, because that's how you get feedback of what works for you. And through that process and combining with all of these people asking me questions on the internet about their specific situation led me to do more research on the internet through scientific journals, and then just reading. I ended up getting certifications in nutrition. I have books. I constantly try to learn. I'm just a permanent student. And I suggest everybody out there to do the same thing, trust but verify. That's something that we used to say in engineering all the time. Trust what credible people are saying, but verify it yourself by doing the research and seeing what works for you.
And are there any of the documentaries that you think are a good representation? Or are they all kind of a little biased in one way or
by
another?
nature, any documentary is biased.
Right.
That's just the if you set out to put together a documentary, you're trying to showcase something or show some point, right, that you're trying to prove. Because if not, it would just be a bunch of random scenes and it wouldn't be cohesive or have a storyline. So I think that by nature, all documentaries do have a bias, but bias doesn't necessarily always mean that it's out of integrity or if it's influencing the film to manipulate people. So I think that, yeah, there's always going to be people that have an agenda, but if the agenda is to help people heal, or if the agenda is to improve health in a way that is aligned with the literature of what science has to prove, then I think that's a good agenda. You know, I'd be okay with that. So yeah, I think some documentaries are definitely biased. You know, I was in the Game Changers documentary too. I had a brief role in that, which caused a lot of stir in the health and nutrition space, but that's like any documentary.
How so? What was the stir? Oh, Game Changers in and of itself did, or your
role?
Yeah,
not my role. Nobody really specifically had an issue with me in the movie, but just the documentary of the Game Changers caused a lot of stir. Just because
I remember that. It was it was super hyped up for it was like a few month period.
Yeah. I mean, just because the fact that it is counterculture, it's kind of against the grain with what's normally out there as far as like what you need to eat for being a high performance athlete. And I think just showcasing examples of that, not necessarily telling everybody they should be plant-based, but just offering examples of people who are doing it and living it and with this alternative approach and seeing all of the success in their respective sport, whether that's bodybuilding or cycling or endurance running. I think that it's important to have representation because, again, it's not something that should be for everybody or could be for everybody. I think that's up to whoever's watching those things, but having examples to go off of and say, okay, if he can do it, I can do it. Or if she can do it, I can do it. I think that's really important because that's something that I craved as a kid growing up, being a vegetarian and not having that many vegetarian examples. Like, you know, imagine if I was growing up and like LeBron was vegan. I'd be like, wow, somebody like me. Like if he can get to that level, I know I could too. So I think that's really important for like the younger generation too.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's a perspective shift, right? Like you have certain avatars that you resonate with exactly like that. You know, it's why when people are creating vision boards, they're like, okay, I love this about this person and they've created their path. And that's why, you know, if you look at all of self-improvement, if you look at people like Tim Ferriss and anyone who studies high performing people, they are studying their habits so that they can then take those habits and then pick apart what works best for you and emulate them yourself and hopefully repeat their success without having to also copycat their failures, hopefully, you know, along the way, even though those are beneficial as well. But, you know, along the lines of perspective change, I think this is a good segue into the psychedelics segment of the podcast is, you know, there's a lot that Bianca, who is, for people that have not met Bianca yet, is Nimai's partner, also huge in this space. We were talking a lot about her experience with psychedelics, and she shared so much perspective shift, and actually a lot with this particular ceremony that she went and had several years ago that seemed to like radically shift everything about her life. And I'd love you to share how and if psychedelics have played a role in your life when they first came into your field, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah. Okay. So funny story. The first time I ever took psychedelics, I was 12, and it was
so not what I was expecting you to say.
It was by accident too. So
it's like when the unlabeled chocolate mushrooms. Is this what this is?
Kind of. Yeah. So I won't go into detail, but for whatever reason,
if you want to go into detail,
for whatever reason, one of my siblings had some sweet tarts that were laced with acid on the desk that was the family desk that we would use to get on the computer. This was when I was 12. So this is when I would come home from school and get on AOL Instant Messenger. And
what was your screen name?
I really don't remember. I wish I could remember my screen name.
Man, you need to look that up.
We'll
put that in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. Okay. But I remember getting home from school. I was the only one home, and seeing these two sweet tarts sitting on the desk, and I was like, "Fuck yeah, sweet tarts!"
Oh my god!
Took both of them. Didn't know that they had LSD on them, and unbeknownst to me, I started tripping. And my parents came home. My sister told my parents that she suspected that one of her brothers took these sweet tarts. And so...
Were they your sisters or your parents?
They were my sisters.
How old was your sister at the time?
She's a couple years older than me.
Okay.
Yeah, she's a couple years older than me. And so anyway, I start to feel the experience of LSD at 12 years old, not knowing that I had taken it. And as you can imagine, I'm just like, what is going on right now? Like my world is completely melting away and I don't know how to explain what I'm going through. So I started acting really weird. And my parents were great. They were just like monitoring me and making sure that I was okay. And they were just like letting me ride this wave. But
oh my God.
It was a great trip. It was a wonderful experience until it wasn't, because I remember my mom has a big mouth, and at some point they were just watching me, just act a fool. And at one point my mom was like, "So he's in there tripping on acid right now?" And I heard it. And once I heard her say that, it all clicked for me. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, I took my sister's acid on accident and I'm permanently this way now." So I thought it was going to be like this forever.
Oh my God.
So of course, once you have that thought on any psychedelic, it can be a scary thought because that can lead you down a pretty scary rabbit hole. And I just remember after that I was crying, and then ended up being okay. But that was actually my first introduction to any psychedelics. And after that experience, I had pretty much told myself, I'm done with psychedelics. I don't want to do this again. So it wasn't until the age of 20, maybe 28, 27, 28, that I had my next psychedelic experience. And that was because I was older and I had learned more about the benefits or the healing properties of psychedelics and how they can offer you a perspective shift and allow you to see or get a little bit of separation from your normal day-to-day perspective. And when you do that, you can learn about yourself in ways and see new perspectives of maybe things that you're doing, or maybe things that you have done, or maybe a memory that you've had. So I had a friend that I was talking to at a party tell me that he was going to go to an ayahuasca ceremony. And this is somebody that I deeply respected and trusted. And he's actually an MD as well. So I was like, okay, if it's cool with him, then maybe there is some, there's definitely going to be a safe place, and he's done it before and he trusts these people. So I ended up buying 2 seats in this ceremony, one for me and one for Bianca. And I surprised her with it was a Christmas gift. And I was like, "Hey babe, this is our present for, we're going to be going in 2 weeks to sit with ayahuasca. Are you cool with that?" And she was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I thought it'd be cool to, sit with it and just experience it and maybe do some healing. I don't know what we're really getting into, but everybody that I've talked to that's done it has had really positive experiences afterwards. So let's go for it." So then we did, we prepared ourselves by eating properly and removing all like caffeine and like everything for like weeks leading up to the ceremony. And we had two nights in this ceremony, and it was life-changing. That's like the best way I can describe it. Like, there was my life before it and then my life after it. And it really revealed to me all of the areas that I wasn't free, and maybe not all of them. It allowed me to scratch the surfaces of the big areas that in my life where I was not free. And much of that revolved around my ability to feel, or to allow myself to feel all of this emotion and pain that I was like compartmentalizing. And it just allowed me to face it in a really beautiful way for me to process what I needed to process in that ceremony.
Wow. Okay. I have so many comments. I mean, first of all, I would love to have a conversation with your sister about those sweet tarts.
It's one of her favorite stories.
I think it's one of my favorite stories now. I mean, it's amazing. And I have to know, did your parents have experience with psychedelics where they were like, okay, so they're kind of like, they're hippies?
My parents, they renounced all material possessions when they were in their like 20s to live in a commune in a temple. Like, they're pretty spiritual people. They've had their fair share of experiences.
Rodeo.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. No, so I'm just picturing being inside your parents' brain and how knowing that, if they can, after they assess like you're safe and you're good and you're going to be okay, how hysterical that must have been from their perspective. Like, just the whole scene. And then also really interesting that, because psychedelics are not for everyone. And actually, I would never advise giving acid to a 12-year-old if you can avoid it, if that was obviously, and something that created some fear in you around psychedelics until a much later stage in your life. And obviously they come back around whenever they're supposed to. But it's also interesting that because you had a conversation with someone who you respected and they had a medical degree, that you felt safe kind of venturing into this like, adult level journeying with to go and sit with ayahuasca. And
I will preface too that I also did the same approach. I did my research on it too. Like I read books, I listened to podcasts,
Do you remember
watched
what books?
YouTube. Yeah, I read Food of the Gods by I believe Terrence McKenna, which was a pretty dense book about the history and lineage of psychedelics and human culture. Or like it was really fascinating. There was another book called The Teachings of Don Juan that I think it's Carlos Castaneda wrote that one too, and that one was a really fascinating book about plant medicines and the use of like them in shamanic settings too, which was really fascinating. And then I happened to be getting more exposed to this community that also had a lot of experience with plant medicines too. So that all of those gave me the confidence that I needed to be comfortable going down that route. So I'm not saying that anybody should just like take it on a whim for recreational purposes. I think that in the right setting, it can be a very powerful tool for self-discovery. And that was the intention that I was going into it with.
And so when you say your life was, pre this ceremony and post, like what were some actual tangible changes? And I would also love, because of the field that you work in, were any of those changes physical? Because a lot of what I've been spending my time thinking about and having conversations around, whether it's on this podcast or outside of it, is the physical manifestations of trauma, how it shows up in your body, and then how, when you go and experience psychedelics, whether it's psilocybin, MDMA, ayahuasca, that the reason why you release trauma in the body is because you're able to actually go and process it. But like from a physical level, how wild that is, that this thing, that you ingest a substance and it can help you figure out what's happening in your knee, and you can walk out, of that experience in less pain, or at least figure out how to process it. So what were some of the actual tangible changes in you, whether it's physical or spiritual?
Yeah, mine, I've been really blessed to be really healthy my whole life. I haven't had too many issues with health or like chronic pain or anything like that. So mine wasn't necessarily physical. It was more spiritual, emotional for me. So afterwards, after that experience, I felt like I was 10 pounds lighter, even though I weighed the same, because I was carrying around all of this baggage with me, emotional baggage, I would say. And in that,
where do you think it was from?
Definitely my childhood. And I won't get into too much detail, just because that in itself is a very long story.
Yeah, episode 2.
Yeah, it will require several episodes to unpack that. But it was my inability to allow myself to express myself. So I became very good at being cool, calm, and collected, even though internally I was crying for help and wanted to just express myself in a way that I could receive help or allow others to understand me. So I pretty much went a majority of my life not showing who I was. And I got very good at putting on this layer of this person that was wounded and really wanted to come out as like just sharing how I authentically felt, but never felt safe enough to share in that way. So in that, I had gotten so good at it that I stopped feeling things that I needed to feel. So I can remember just really difficult moments in my life as an adult. I didn't even shed a tear about it because I had gotten so good at compartmentalizing that it was just like wouldn't penetrate me. And so after that experience, I was able to release and finally cry. And I was like, the floodgates were open. It was like faucets. I was just like purging through my tears and just really allowed myself to see my pain and see it not as something to be avoided or something to be ashamed of, but something that really offered a lot of opportunity and a lot of gifts that if I were to shine a light of awareness in these shadows, there's actually a lot that I could learn about myself and then take that with me moving forward in my life and integrate that to where, hey, it's okay to feel, it's okay to cry, it's okay to have these emotions. You don't have to be so resilient or so strong because that will lead to unhealthy habits or unhealthy behaviors or maybe physical manifestations of sickness in different ways. So that was the biggest takeaway that I had. And like I said, it felt like 10 years of therapy in one night. for me.
And it is interesting that, and actually I just connected the dots with a few people in my life that are whether they're fitness influencers, and a lot of their work is with their physical body, and they've kind of had a similar takeaway from their experience with psychedelics. And so it's and one of my friends had shared with me, he's like, I realized I was building up my physical body to protect my inner emotional body. And so, like, you know, if you look at most of the best parts of our personality come from, you know, micro traumas in our childhood. And so they're neither good nor bad, but it's just like knowing where they come from and then being able to like assess that it sounds like for one of the first times in your life, because it's just like, it's so hyper focused. It's such a transformational experience.
Definitely. I mean, I would say that, you know, there's a common phrase in bodybuilding that says breakups make bodybuilders. And that's because, you know, that pain needs to be channeled somehow. So many people find refuge in the gym, and they're able to take this energy that's really painful and then put it into something that is productive in a way, or essentially can build layers of protection. You know,
physical layers,
physically, like you're creating space between you and other people by adding layers of muscle to yourself. So that is a compensation that, you know, if you have the awareness, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but if you let that become out of control, then, you know, you attach a lot of your identity and your ego to how you look or the shape that you have or how much muscle you have. So that was also part of like a process for me of leaving bodybuilding or retiring from the sport of bodybuilding and trying to be as big as I possibly could, because that was also wrapped up in ego and identity, as far as like, oh, now I've created this persona that I have to fulfill because now people see me as this vegan bodybuilder that, you know, has an impressive physique, and I have to be even more impressive and compensate for the fact that I'm vegan, because if I'm an unimpressive vegan bodybuilder, then what does that say about veganism as a whole? So I had to go extra far with it until finally I realized that, hey, this was great. This bodybuilding served its purpose for me. It gave me an outlet to find my passion and my purpose and my dharma, but it's not who I am. It's just, it was kind of like for me to discover that. So after I kind of let go of that identity and just started really tapping into like who Nimai was outside of that sport, it took me a while, because, you know, especially being on such a big platform, you get feedback, like unsolicited feedback from people. So if you're like slightly out of shape than what you were before, people were like, hey man, you're way smaller than what you used to be, like, or hey man, you're not even as impressive as this guy, or like comparing you to other people. And like initially that stung, that's hurt my ego big time whenever I was like, you know, dialing it back. But now those types of comments don't bother me. Of course, I'm human, and sometimes I have days just like anybody else where a stranger leaving a hateful comment can get to me, but I've built up a really great understanding of like who I am at my core, and how I'm not attached to other people's opinions anymore, or what they have to say, and don't believe the good or the bad anymore, because if you believe either one, then you put yourself at risk for attaching yourself to that validation. And once you internally validate yourself, then you realize you don't need any of that.
Yeah. And what would you say people don't know about you that you share on the internet? I asked Bianca this as well, like kind of in a different flavor, but, you know, a lot of what we've talked about, I feel like I have an understanding of like your history of what led you to this point in your life. But even if you look at your content, you know, if people that are starting to follow you, they see what you're talking about in your podcast, it feels like a shift away from, you know, the isolated vegan fitness stuff. Like that's still a huge part of your life, but there's so much more to you. And even my reflection, you know, to you is just with what people that are mutual friends have said about you is just like, you know, so many amazing things about your personality and the type of person that you are. Like, what would you say a lot of people don't know about you?
Oh man, so much. I would say probably that I'm really funny in real life. Like I'm really funny in real
goofy. Life. We were coming up with some really good podcast pranks.
I'm really goofy in real life, but I don't show it as much online. And that's also, I can be honest here and say that that's also like an ego thing, like, or not an ego thing, but like a protection of the credibility, of the perceived credibility that I have built up in this wellness space, to think like, oh, you can't be intelligent and goofy at the same time, or if you're too goofy, then people won't take you seriously. So that's something that I don't share as much of online, but like within my close circle of friends, like all we do is mess around and joke and do stupid things all the time. So I want to bring more of that to my content, just because I feel like, I don't know, it's just more authentic. And I've built my platform up to the point where people only know this kind of narrow sliver of who I am and what I share, but I'm trying to be more open about that too, which is why I started the podcast too, because there's so many other things I want to share and talk about outside of vegan fitness, and that is such a huge part of who I am. But I really care about just asking questions and learning about life and learning about people and sharing my experiences and helping. Hopefully me sharing my experiences helps other people in a way that is beyond just the physical realm, because I think that the physical realm is a symptom of the internal realm. So many people that can't even find themselves getting in shape, they keep finding themselves on this like hamster wheel every year. They're like, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. That next year, I'm going to lose that same 10 pounds. They can't really find why they can't commit or have discipline towards something. And it's something underneath, something deeper. So now I'm really curious about that, because now that I've been doing all this work in self-discovery, I'm like, okay, I had this part figured out, but like this area can really get to the root of a lot of people's maybe constraints, and how I can help, reveal that or offer my perspective, and hopefully other people will find a new perspective too.
Yeah, I think that the typical journey, at least my own and most of the people I know that are into wellness, they normally discover physical wellness. And they're like, oh my God, you can change your body with movement. And that's profound. And then you're like, oh my God, if you eat a certain, a certain profile of things 80% of the time, it makes the movement, number one, so much more impactful. And that's so profound. And then people go, start to understand the community aspect of things, and then the spiritual aspect. And then it's just like you go deeper and deeper, deeper down the rabbit hole, and you realize that like foundationally, a lot of the physical manifestations of like how we are and why we are, it's the stuff you've kind of shared. It comes from childhood, or it comes from like certain interactions you've had. And it just, so many things start to make sense, but the starting with the physical journey, I do feel like is the gateway for a lot of understanding, deeper. And so you've started that, and you've opened this massive portal for people to connect with you through the physical. And now you're just, starting this whole spiritual, expansion and whatever you want to call it. I mean, what would you say the podcast is mostly focused on? Like, what conversations are you excited about having?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the same kind of conversations we're having. Yeah. Just like really tapping into what drives people and how people have gotten to the point where they are and what lessons they learned along the way. Because I always find it so fascinating when you meet somebody and you meet them where they are and you're like, how did you get here?
You look at their LinkedIn profile and you're like, what happened here? You went from corrosion intern in Louisiana, and now you're there. I'm like, I laughed out loud when I saw that online. Yeah. I was like, this makes no sense. Yeah. I was like, this is not what I was expecting.
I mean, and you can see clear as day, like who is like, I don't know, that doesn't feel like me. That doesn't resonate with me, but that's what I was doing. And again, it was because I thought that was what I had to do. And if I wouldn't have went through my process of getting to where I am and shared it, then, I don't even know what I'd be doing. I might still be doing that. And I want other people to know that they can also, find their way and find their path, and it doesn't have to be perfect. As it can be messy. It probably will be. And that's the fun part. Like, it's not the destination, it's the journey. I always tell my clients the same thing. It's the process. If you can really fall in love with the process, then you're always arriving. You've never arrived anywhere. You're just always arriving and always meeting yourself in new ways. So that's my goal with like the podcast too, is to help people on that process. So yeah, it's been fun too. It's been a lot of fun.
You get to know people so well. I'm like, selfishly, I just like doing the podcast because I got to hang out with amazing people on my couch,
Same.
And they could come to your couch. It's like the best case scenario.
You come to me and we get to have like an hour and a half long conversation. I know. I absolutely love the podcast. It's like my new favorite form of content.
Amazing.
It's absolutely so much
fun.
fun.
I'm coming to your house tomorrow because I'm recording with Bianca. So I'll see you again tomorrow.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about your relationship and see if you had any takeaways. Bianca shared some really good ones, but around how psychedelics have impacted your approach to your relationship, how they've just, impacted it overall? Like, whether it was from that ceremony you mentioned or continued use of them in the future?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that ceremony in particular was really powerful for both of us. And I think going through that together was something really special. That was a really special experience that we got to share and then come out the other side and learn about each other in so many more different ways, because it's it's outside of the scope of your awareness, like the stuff that you learn while you're in that space. And then you come back to, this consciousness or this awareness, and you're like, well, let me tell you what I found out about myself. And when you share that with somebody that you're like in relationships with, it just allows you to have that much more of a deeper bond and deeper connection, because like you're constantly learning about the other person and vice versa. So I think that they can be very powerful in that sense of like getting to meet your partner in a new way. And as they learn more about themselves and uncover areas that they might even be obvious to you, but not to them, and hear it come from them as far as like, oh, like I realize this is why I show up this way, or this is what I realize about my father wound and how that relates to you, because you're like, you play this masculine role in my life, and I subconsciously want you to fulfill my unmet childhood needs. So I put a lot of pressure on you, and I'll be triggered or activated when you don't fulfill that. And to you, you're completely oblivious to that. So this is, something I learned, and now I can depersonalize it and not like make it so much about you, but make it in those situations when I'm triggered, I can understand myself better, and you can understand how to show up for me in that way. So I think those are really, really important lessons that her and I learned in our own process, and psychedelics have definitely helped facilitate or helped maybe shorten the timeline of that discovery of self for us, so that we can get to know each other better.
How do psychedelics play a part in your current life? Have you, done several ceremonies, and then do you ever experiment with microdosing? What's your current kind of stance on them?
Yeah, I have experimented with microdosing. I don't do it every day, or I haven't done it in years. I did it during COVID, which was fascinating, because that is when I was really going through a lot of my own. I mean, COVID for everybody was challenging, and it caused a lot of people to break up, and I'm no different. Me and Bianca broke up during COVID. Oh,
that was this time period you guys split up.
Yeah. Because we lived in a loft, and that loft was like, there was no walls. So we were constantly in each other's space, and it was like a pressure cooker. We couldn't leave, couldn't do anything. So just like, it was a pressure cooker. It like boiled up all the stuff that we were avoiding or we couldn't like address. And it just allowed us to really confront that, and in a way that was very powerful. And I think that at that time I was microdosing with like just mushrooms. And I think that having that experience while microdosing really allowed me to show up in the relationship completely differently, because it really allowed me to take accountability and see myself in a way that I wasn't able to see myself. Because if you have, this image of yourself, and you've just been so firm with who you are and how you show up, then it's so rigid, and you don't really have any wiggle room. So with the microdose, it allowed me just enough like separation to see.
It's like slightly neuroplastic.
Like a little bit for me to be like, oh, okay, like that is an interesting pattern, and why am I that way? And how does that show up in my relationship and affect how she sees me, or how I am able to empathize with her? So that was the last time I microdosed, and I've had my own like psychedelic experiences since then, obviously. But I'm a believer in it, and I think that is like my experience. And not to say anybody should follow my experience, but just I like sharing, because sometimes that's what it takes for somebody to feel confident that that's a path that they want to go on. And like you said, like peer to peer, I've had so many relationships in friendships where them sharing their experiences with me really allowed me to learn about myself too. So it's really powerful.
Yeah. And why I think it's super unique when people that have achieved a certain level of physical and mental fitness, in both realms, right? Like, a lot of the top CEOs in the world, a lot of the best companies in the world have accredited, secretly mostly, their success to inspiration because of creativity through psychedelics, whether that be through microdosing or something that came to them through a ceremony. And there's a lot of really incredible athletes in the world that are using mushrooms. I want to talk about, mushrooms of all types, but psilocybin specifically, or other psychedelics, to enhance their physical performance. And they credit it to like the ability, whether it be through the psychosomatic, ability to process their own trauma, so that they are like or motivated in the gym, whatever it ends up being, or like they actually feel more energy and like they feel like their muscle recovery is faster. It's really interesting. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me on Instagram when I've shared content around specifically people who are, have reached a certain level physically, like some of the top athletes in the world, sharing about their experience microdosing, because they're like, oh, if it's someone that I look up to in that way, that have like it's not a bunch of like bums that are like hanging out on their couch, like, just chilling on the weekends, like watching TV, Netflix. Like it's like some of the best performers in the world that are talking about this stuff. That's when perspectives start to shift.
Yeah, because there's a stigma around mushrooms or psychedelics that existed since like the 60s of like, oh, it's just a bunch of hippies that are burnt out and acting crazy. It's like that is a stigma that, has some political agenda behind it too. If you think of like big pharma and all the other stuff that, again, with the research that I had done in the books that I had read, there was another book called Stealing Fire. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, by Michael Pollan.
Or Stephen Collar.
Maybe, I don't remember, but Stealing Fire, that was another one that I read, and it was really good too. And it talks about the military even using psychedelics and microdosing, or top CEOs and their experiences, and it gives a little bit of credibility to it. At least it gives a lot of credibility to it, but it gave credibility to it to me to see exactly what you're talking about. That these are like ultra high performers and the best at what they do, and they're able to still show up in their businesses and have the level of success that they have in it. You're not going to go off the rails or like derail your life by incorporating this tool essentially to help you understand yourself, so that you can then show up to be a better leader or have that creative energy to bring to your business or whatever service you offer to the world. And I know that is what my goal is when I take psychedelics or like microdose, is like, how can I learn about myself so that I can be more authentic and become more of me without all this resistance and without all these fears that are holding me back, so that I can show up and be the best leader in my business and show up in the most creative way, because I am my own business at this point, and it's good for business if I show up as myself even more. So that's like, it's a win-win for me in that case. So
yeah, no, I love that. I was going to ask, do you incorporate functional mushrooms into your life at all? Or I'm sure they're in like some of the products you take, but like, I don't know if it's something you've extensively gone into. Have you looked at any of because you're deep into the science, like really interesting stuff around cordyceps and athletic performance? Is this stuff that's come across your field at all?
Yeah. So actually, as part of myself, I own a company called Veg Nutrition, and one of our products has ingredient called Pico 2, which is a blend of 6 different adaptogenic mushrooms, including cordyceps, lion's mane, reishi, chaga, and there's some literature behind it that show that you can increase your power output by 20% by supplementing with this before a physical activity. So I think in this study they did cycling, and they measured their peak power output for how long they could sustain that. And once they supplemented with it, they were able to do, I think it was up to 20% longer and sustain that for 20% longer, which if you're an athlete and I want to benefit from that, and if I can take a supplement, like especially a natural supplement that helps me perform better, like I'm going to explore it, because when you're at that level, you want any kind of competitive advantage that you can have, and especially if it's a natural competitive advantage, that's like the biggest like thing that I'm like interested in, is like, how can I like take something that is from the earth and incorporate it, because I do believe in the power of plants. I know mushrooms are fungi, but I do believe in the intelligence and the power of plants and incorporating that into my lifestyle. So for sure, I've definitely used like more functional mushrooms, and I want to learn more about them because I do like the mushroom coffee in the morning too. Yep. And I do take another supplement that has like cognitive benefits as well. So yeah, the more I can benefit from those things, the more I'll take them.
Yeah, they're powerful. They really work. And I always ask, athletes, most of them are already taking cordyceps. Some of them aren't. Yeah. Even knowledgeable about the fact that a lot of their products have cordyceps in them because, in Eastern medicine, mushrooms have been around for thousands and thousands of years. And so they're not, they're kind of laughing at the West right now because we're like, oh my God, mushrooms. They're like having this phase. And they're like, yeah, we've been, the first reishi mushroom was discovered in 2050 BCE and it's been used as a core ingredient in Chinese medicine for thousands of years. Yeah. But cordyceps is amazing. And my co-founder, Brian, started using cordyceps to get off of coffee. I use it every single day, but you feel it. I mean, like when you take a high dose of cordyceps before the gym, it is like, and I've never been a fan of the pre-workout with a lot of the caffeines because I feel like I'm going to die. I feel like my heart's going to stop. But if you take cordyceps combined with lion's mane and other functionals, you feel amazing. It's like this calm, focused energy. And a lot of athletes, big celebrity athletes that are playing in, the top of the top NFL, and all of the other, like all the other, NHL, all of the top sports, like they're using cordyceps often, which is really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, focus whenever you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, whatever sport you're training in is so important. Like having your ability to really approach a task or a practice with that level of intensity and being just so aware of not only what you're doing, but also aware of your body, because that in itself gives you this whole other advantage. Like, for example, if you say you take something like cordyceps and it allows you to focus, right? You can bring lion's mane usually, and lion's mane. Okay, so you can bring that level of awareness to whatever muscle group that you're training. For example, if I'm doing heavy squats, you hear often about this mind-muscle connection. And whenever you're doing something like heavy squats, like your mind is all over the place. You're like, okay, like I'm going through my mental cues. I'm like, okay, feet shoulder width apart, activate my glutes, rotate my pelvis a little bit forward, engage my core. Like I'm thinking of these things whenever I'm doing it. But then as you're doing the movement, your mind is like, oh man, this burns. This is really heavy. I don't want to do anymore. Like stop. But when you have those supplements that help you focus, you can be like, you can see past that and be like, no, okay, keep engaging, activate this muscle group, see if I can really squeeze every muscle fiber while I'm doing this movement so that I can maximize, my movement or maximize the efficiency of this movement to get the most out of it. And once you do that every single day and every single repetition, then you're able to get a little bit further along than somebody that is distracted whenever they're training or not taking that or bringing that level of intensity to whatever it is that they're doing. So it's those little things. It's those tiny little things that add up to make big differences. And that's what separates the best from the second to best at those like little milliseconds.
I love that. Yeah. And what I like to think about with mushrooms specifically, whether it's psilocybin mushrooms or functional mushrooms, is like every time they go into your body, I'm like, ooh, what are they trying to tell me? What are they trying to teach me? And Bianca actually said this on the podcast, not to repeat too much of what she shared, but she was like, when I took psilocybin mushrooms, I felt like they were trying to tell me that I needed to get an explant. And like, if you really tap in and listen, whether it's lion's mane, a high dose of lion's mane, because you're, using it in your coffee to help increase cognitive function and promote neurogenesis in your brain, or you're ingesting psilocybin mushrooms in a ceremonial setting or microdosing for work, it's like, there's always something that they're teaching you and adjusting to help you somewhere along the way. And it's, I very much believe mushrooms run the show of the world rather than humans. So that's a whole other longer rabbit hole. But the last few things I want to ask you about, and then we'll wrap it up. We covered so much good ground here today. I feel like I learned so much about you. We'll have to do this again. If you had to summarize what the impact that the impact that your work has on the world, you kind of touched on it, but if you had to summarize it with everything that you're doing and your current collection of projects, how would you share that?
That's good. That's a good question. I really try to bring the intention of like, how can I help people? How can I serve people in the best possible way? And how can I use my gifts and my talents and my faculties to bring that to the world? So whether that is through products or services, I really hope that I can just help people, one, become healthier, because when people are healthier, that's when they can show up as, their most powerful self. And let's face it, if you have like an ache or a pain, like your mental resilience is way lower, and you might get aggravated quicker, you might get depressed. And when you are experiencing those negative emotions, that takes you away from the creative abundance that you have available to you at all times whenever you're feeling healthy. So my hope and my goal is that whenever, my products or services are allowing people to feel healthier, that's allowing them to show up more creatively, and then also more lovingly and more compassionately, because that is ultimately my goal, is to reduce as much, like that same philosophy that I talked about in the beginning of this podcast, of this concept of ahimsa, which is trying to live a life of nonviolence through my thoughts, actions, and deeds. I would like to have other people live that way, or create a world where we're all living more compassionately and thinking of others in more loving ways, and how can we help instead of how can we take from others. So I would say that's my goal.
I love that. You need to write that down and put that on the website. And in a paragraph form. I love the way you worded that. If you had to, pick a few things that you're really excited about in the next 6 months that you want to share with people, like what's kind of cooking that you're excited about?
One that comes to my mind is, like I said, I've been doing a lot of transitions, and one of them is my fitness business is still, my coaching business is still thriving and still doing really well.
And you do one-to-one coaching.
So I do group coaching at the moment, but I'm transitioning into more one-to-one coaching, where it'll be more touch points, more phone calls with my clients, because I've been doing group coaching for the last 4 years, and some of my groups are 600 people at a time, like per cohort, and we'll go through 2 months or 8 weeks together, where they'll start on the same day and end the same day, and I support them, me and my team, through the whole journey.
Wow.
And some of them are vegan, some of them are just trying to adopt a vegan lifestyle or optimize their existing vegan lifestyle. So a lot of support there. But by doing that the last 4 years, I've really had all of this exposure to people and what the common themes are that prevent people from achieving either the physique that they want, or creating the habits that really are aligned with the type of person that they want to become. So my next phase is going more into one-on-one mentorship that is more expansive than just fitness and nutrition, but to really help people on that one-on-one personal level, essentially like somebody like me 5 years ago, whenever I was at this point where I had a career, or I was going in a direction where I was like, this doesn't feel aligned with who I am and the life that I want to live. And I feel like there's so much more available to me, and I don't know where to start. And I went through that process on my own. So I would love to help people shorten that timeline for them to make that jump a little bit easier, and to find that passion, to find their purpose, to increase the quality of their life and their relationships. And the program is called Intentioneering. So basically intentionally engineering the life that you want, and going through this systematic process of, defining what it is that you want, creating what are your assumptions. Like these are all techniques that we use in engineering, and bringing that towards these different areas of life to really optimize or improve the circumstances that are more aligned to what that person wants.
I love that. And I also think it's so full circle, because we started off this episode talking about how you made the jump from corrosion engineer intern, whatever the official title was, to where you're at today. But, that's really what you're trying to help people do in summary, is like close the gap. There's a really good piece of content waiting to happen where you're screen recording your LinkedIn and showing how you made the jump from like there to there. But, it's exactly what you're trying to do. I love it. I think it's going to be so impactful.
Thank you.
What is and also, before I ask this last question, I do think you need to record some sort of a podcast episode on like all the funny things that we talked about before the episode. I think that would be like your good, like coming out of the whatever you want to call it, like comedian closet, spiritual. Bianca said she's coming out of the spiritual closet.
I know.
Where people are coming out of
the psychedelic closet.
There's so many closets we need to come out of. But that is life, like I feel like throughout life, you're just kind of coming out of the various closets at various points of your journey until there's just no more closets left. And, there's always a bunch of closets left. But if you had to say what is the most single important lesson that psychedelics have taught you, what would you say?
The single most important lesson that psychedelics have taught me, that it's safe to tell the truth, discovering your truth is part of that, and sharing that truth, it won't ever lead you in the wrong direction. Like if you continuously share your truth in a way that feels authentic, then you're always going to be on the right path towards your highest timeline, your most truest timeline, whatever that is. So that would be my biggest lesson.
That resonates. Love that. Where can people find you?
Just Nimai Delgado at everything. You saw, like, there's not too many Nimais on the internet. You just type my name and you'll find all my social medias on Instagram, on YouTube, on Twitter, on podcasts. So yeah, I put a lot of content out there, so it's easy to find.
You do. And definitely check out the podcast. I've listened to a few of the episodes and it's really good. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch more coming our way. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm so glad. For having me. And I love that you just have like a 5-minute drive home. We didn't realize we live so close to each other.
I know.
So I
was literally here yesterday at the pool with some friends.
Well, I'm coming to hang at your house tomorrow. So I'll be seeing more of you. Thank you. Glad you came on.
Thanks for having me on.
More to come.
Yeah.
Yay.
See you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for diving into the multiverse with us. If you're interested in being a future guest on the show, sponsorship, partnership, or you're just mushroom curious, we're always looking to expand our mycelium network. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Into the Multiverse, where you can find clips from this podcast, psychedelic legalization news, events that we're doing, and so much more. In addition, we've also created the world's first ever mushroom-specific marketplace called The Multiverse, which you can find on Instagram at Multiverse or online at yourmultiverse.com. We've also created our own in-house consumer lifestyle brand called Supermush. We make mushroom mouth sprays. We make a whole line of mushroom streetwear. You can find it on Instagram at Supermush or online at supermush.com. We'll see you next week. Much love.